Part 1, The Auction House of Despair. The auction house was a place where hope went to die. The air was thick with the stench of oil, sweat, and desperation. Neon lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow on the crowd of buyers and sellers, a mix of species from across the galaxy. The rhythmic clank of a broken ventilation system echoed through the metal walls, a grim soundtrack to the proceedings. In the center of the room, behind an energy barrier, stood the merchandise. Some were strong, flexing their muscles to impress potential buyers. Others had given up, their eyes hollow, resigned to their fate. And then there was her. She sat in the back, her wrists and ankles shackled, a faintly humming collar around her neck. Her skin was a pale violet with a silvery sheen, her large, dark eyes reflecting the neon lights like endless voids. She had been here before, many times. Sold, returned, sold again. Each time, the traders grew more frustrated, muttering under their breath about her worthlessness. Lot number 9043, the auctioneer announced, his voice dripping with disdain. This one's, well, you can see for yourselves. The energy barrier flickered and dropped, and one of the traders shoved her forward. She stumbled onto the platform, her movements unsteady but her expression calm. The crowd murmured, unimpressed. She's small, someone said. Not small, another corrected. Light. Look at her bone structure. She'd snap in a strong breeze. And that color? What even is that? She exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. It was always the same. The sneers, the half-hearted bids, the disinterest. Soon, someone would offer a handful of credits, and she'd be hauled off to another station, another planet, another failed investment. And then he spoke, I'll take her. The voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. It wasn't loud or commanding, just casual, as if buying a sentient being was no different from picking up a snack at a convenience stall. All heads turned, including hers. She expected to see another arrogant warlord, another merchant with false promises, another monster hiding behind wealth. Instead, she saw a human. He didn't belong here. Dressed in a patched-up jacket and scuffed boots, he looked more like a dock worker than a buyer. His dark hair was a mess, sticking out in directions that defied physics, and the stubble on his jaw suggested he either couldn't grow a proper beard or didn't care enough to try. He had an easy stance, one hand in his pocket, the other lazily scratching the back of his head. The auctioneer blinked. You want this one? The human nodded. Sure. A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone stifled a laugh. Sir, the auctioneer said carefully, as if addressing a particularly dim-witted child, this one isn't exactly premium stock. Oh yeah, the human squinted up at her. She's breathing, isn't she? Well, yes, but... Cool. How much? The traders exchanged glances. Someone snorted. You serious? You're actually offering credits for that? The human shrugged. Listen, you called her worthless, so I'm thinking, how much for something worth nothing? Silence. Then laughter. The auctioneer exhaled through his nose, tapping at his holographic screen. Look, if you want her that badly, fine. 300 credits. The human raised a brow. 300 for nothing? The auctioneer groaned. Fine. 200. The human grinned. 150. Another trader sighed, just take her already. The gavel slammed down. She blinked, her mind struggling to catch up. That was it. He had bought her for 150 credits. The collar deactivated, the shackles unlocked, and the traders shoved her forward. She stumbled, but the human caught her before she could fall. His grip was firm but not forceful, his fingers warm against her wrist. For a moment, she simply stared at him. And then, finally, she found her voice. Why? The human tilted his head. What, you wanted to stay? She frowned. You don't even know what I am. He grinned. I know what you aren't. Her eyes narrowed. And what's that? Worthless. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That was definitely new. He let go of her wrist and gestured toward the exit. Come on. You look like you could use a drink. I don't drink. Great. More for me. She hesitated, but there was no collar around her throat, no chains on her wrists. So she followed him. And for the first time in a long time, she walked away on her own. Part 3, Kath Station and the Shadow of the Past. The silence between them stretched too long. Lyra could hear the faint hum of the space station's failing ventilation system, the distant chatter of traders haggling over spare ship parts, the click of someone adjusting a blaster's safety behind them. Voss's stare bore into her, not with the casual disinterest of someone looking at a worthless thing, but with recognition. That was what scared her the most. I don't know what you think I am, Lyra said carefully, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest, but I'm not for sale. Jax, standing beside her, gave a casual nod. Yeah. What she said. Then, as if realizing he had more to add, he turned back to Voss and wagged a finger. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you stopped looking at my friend like she's a rare antique you suddenly remembered is worth a fortune. It's creepy. Voss huffed a laugh, a deep rumbling sound that suggested amusement but held an edge of something darker. You should be careful, human. You don't know what you're carrying. Hey, neither do I, Lyra snapped, and it's my life. The alien considered her for a moment, then shrugged, a small, almost dismissive gesture. Maybe that's for the best. Jax narrowed his eyes. That sounded way too cryptic. Voss smirked. Then take the warning and go. And just like that, he turned and walked away, vanishing into the crowd. Lyra exhaled, not realizing she had been holding her breath. Jax rocked back on his heels, then clapped his hands together. Well, that was ominous. Time to get off this station before someone else decides to put a bounty on our heads. Nova's voice crackled over the comms unit strapped to Jax's wrist. Fun fact, there's already a bounty on your head, Jax. Jax groaned. Who this time? Someone named Krell the Butcher. Lyra blinked. The Butcher? Jax sighed. I may have accidentally sold him fake reactor fuel last year. Lyra rubbed her temples. You are actually the worst. I improvised. We need to leave. Agreed. The Star Drifter shook violently as they pulled away from Kath Station, its engines rattling in protest. Jax gritted his teeth, gripping the controls. Nova, are we leaking atmosphere? Not yet, the AI replied cheerfully, but I'd say there's a 70% chance we explode before dinner. Lyra, seated beside him, tightened the straps on her harness. You fly like a drunk asteroid. Hey, I get us where we need to go. Barely. The ship jerked to the left as they cleared the station's gravitational pull. Jax exhaled and leaned back in his chair, satisfied that they had survived, for now. Hours later, they drifted through space, the hum of the engines a soft lullaby after the chaos. Lyra sat across from Jax in the tiny, cluttered dining area, a half-full cup of questionable liquid in her hands. She wasn't sure what it was, only that Jax had offered it to her with the words, "Don't ask what's in it. Just drink it." So, Jax said, tapping his fingers on the table, you want to talk about what that was back there? Lyra considered lying, considered brushing it off, saying it didn't matter. But the truth had been clawing at the back of her mind ever since Voss had looked at her with something other than indifference. I don't know what I am, she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. But I know I was never supposed to exist. Jax didn't flinch, didn't react with shock or horror. He simply sipped from his own cup, nodding like she had just told him the weather forecast. Yeah, he said. Lyra blinked. That doesn't bother you? Why would it? Because it should. Jack set his cup down with a soft thunk. Look, Lyra, I don't know what Voss meant. Maybe you're some lost experiment. Maybe you're secret royalty. Maybe you're actually a time-traveling space ghost. Lyra narrowed her eyes. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. See? You're fitting in already. Lyra sighed, but a small, reluctant smile tugged at her lips. She had spent years being dragged from one traitor to another, being told she was worthless, unwanted, a mistake. Now, sitting on a half-broken ship, listening to a reckless human crack dumb jokes, she realized something strange. For the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting to be sold. She wasn't waiting for someone else to decide her fate. She was here because she wanted to be. The next few days passed in a blur of hyperspace jumps, sarcastic AI commentary, and Jax's increasingly absurd attempts to fix the Star Drifter's failing systems. Lyra found herself slowly adapting to the rhythm of life on the ship. She learned to navigate the cluttered corridors, avoid the loose panel in the cargo hold, and tolerate Nova's constant quips. But the encounter with Voss lingered in her mind like a shadow. She couldn't shake the feeling that her past was catching up to her, that the secrets she had buried were about to resurface. One evening, as the ship drifted through a quiet sector of space, Lyra found herself in the cockpit, staring out at the stars. Jax was tinkering with a malfunctioning console, muttering under his breath about stupid wiring and cheap parts. Jax, Lyra said suddenly, what do you know about the Black Crescent? Jax froze, his wrench hovering mid-air. The Black Crescent? As in, the secretive group of scientists who disappeared a decade ago after some shady experiments? Lyra nodded. Yes. Them. Jax set down the wrench and turned to face her, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Why do you ask? Lyra hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, metallic object, a data chip she had found hidden in the Star Drifter's cargo hold. Because I think this belongs to them. Jax's eyes widened. Where did you get that? It was in a crate of spare parts. I found it while cleaning. Jax took the chip from her, turning it over in his hands. This could be dangerous, Lyra. The Black Crescent wasn't just some random group. They were messing with things they shouldn't have, genetic engineering, cosmic energy, stuff that could blow up a planet if it went wrong. Lyra's stomach churned. Do you think I'm one of their experiments? Jax didn't answer right away. Instead, he plugged the chip into the ship's console. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of encrypted files. Only one way to find out, he said. Part 4, The Revelation of Lyra's Origins. The name hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous. Lyra stared at Jax, her mind racing. Voss's sister? You're telling me the guy who wanted to sell me has a sister who's a scientist? Jax shrugged. Small galaxy, huh? Dr. Alara Voss is one of the few people who might know what the Black Crescent was really up to. She was part of their inner circle before they disappeared. Lyra crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. And you think she'll help us? Help might be a strong word, Jax admitted. But she's our best shot at figuring out what's going on. And if anyone can decrypt the rest of these files, it's her. Lyra glanced at the screen, where her own face stared back at her from a Black Crescent research file. The thought of meeting someone connected to her creation, someone who might have answers, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Where is she? Lyra asked. Jax tapped a few buttons on the console, pulling up a star map. Last I heard, she was hiding out on a remote research station near the edge of the Orion Nebula. It's not exactly a vacation spot, but it's safe. Or at least, it was the last time I checked. Lyra raised an eyebrow. When was the last time you checked? 5 years ago? Great. Jax grinned. Don't worry. If anyone can survive in a place like that, it's Alara. She's tough. And smart. And, maybe a little paranoid. Paranoid? Well, when you're hiding from the remnants of a secretive science cult, paranoia comes with the territory. Lyra sighed. This just keeps getting better. The journey to the Orion Nebula took 3 days. 3 days of hyperspace jumps, engine malfunctions, and Nova's increasingly sarcastic commentary. By the time they reached the research station, Lyra was ready to strangle both Jax and the AI. The station was a small, unassuming structure floating in the shadow of a massive gas giant. Its lights flickered weakly, and the docking bay looked like it hadn't been used in years. Cozy, Lyra muttered as they approached. Jax chuckled. You should see the inside. The Star Drifter shuddered as it docked, the sound of metal scraping against metal echoing through the ship. Jax grabbed a toolkit and gestured for Lyra to follow him. Come on. Let's see if Alara's home. The station's interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of dust and stale coolant. The walls were lined with outdated equipment and stacks of data pads. Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Alara, Jax called out, his voice echoing through the empty corridors. It's me. Jax. Don't shoot. There was a long silence, then a voice crackled over the intercom. Jax? Is that really you? In the flesh. You're late. Jax rolled his eyes. Nice to see you too. A door slid open at the end of the corridor, revealing a tall, wiry woman with sharp features and piercing green eyes. Her hair was streaked with gray, and she wore a lab coat that had seen better days. Who's this? Alara asked, nodding toward Lyra. This is Lyra, Jax said. Well, it's complicated. Alara's eyes narrowed as she studied Lyra. You're one of theirs, aren't you? Lyra stiffened. What do you mean? The Black Crescent. You're one of their experiments. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. How do you know? Alara sighed and gestured for them to follow her. Come on. I'll show you. The lab was a chaotic mess of equipment, data pads, and holographic displays. Alara led them to a large screen and began typing furiously. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of files and images. The Black Crescent was obsessed with unlocking the secrets of cosmic energy, Alara explained. They believed it could be harnessed to create life, perfect life. But their experiments were unstable. Dangerous. Lyra stared at the screen, her stomach churning. The files showed blueprints for genetic modifications, energy reactors, and something called Project Singularity. What's Project Singularity? Lyra asked. Alara hesitated, then pulled up a file labeled Subject 0. The image that appeared made Lyra's blood run cold. It was her. You're Subject 0, Alara said quietly. The first successful experiment. But you weren't the only one. Lyra's hands trembled as she reached for the screen. There are others? Alara nodded. The Black Crescent created dozens of subjects, each designed to harness a different aspect of cosmic energy. But something went wrong. The subjects became unstable, and the project was abandoned. The Black Crescent disappeared, and the subjects were scattered across the galaxy. Jax frowned. So Lyra's not just an experiment. She's part of something bigger. Yes, Alara said. And someone is looking for her. Lyra's mind raced. Voss. He recognized me. He knows what I am. Alara's expression darkened. My brother is a fool. If he's involved, it's only because someone promised him credits. But there are others, people who would do anything to get their hands on the Black Crescent's research. Jax crossed his arms. So what do we do? Ilara turned to Lyra. You need to find the others. Together, you might be able to unlock the full potential of your abilities. But you'll need to be careful. If the wrong people find you. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Lyra understood. How do I find them? Lyra asked. Ilara handed her a data pad. This contains the last known locations of the other subjects. It's not much, but it's a start. Lyra took the data pad, her hands trembling. Thank you. Ilara nodded. Good luck. You're going to need it. As they left the station, Lyra felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, determination, and something she couldn't quite name. For the first time, she had answers. But those answers had only led to more questions. You okay? Jax asked as they boarded the Star Drifter. Lyra nodded. Yeah. I need to find the others. Jax grinned. Then let's get to work. Part 2, The Rust Bucket and the Journey begins. The spaceport was a chaotic swirl of neon lights, shouting vendors, and the ever-present hum of distant starship engines. Lyra trailed behind Jax, unsure if she was walking freely or simply following because she had nothing else to do. He hadn't shackled her, hadn't given her orders, hadn't even told her his name. He simply walked ahead, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, weaving through the crowd with a casual ease that suggested he was either very comfortable in places like this or too dumb to realize how easily he could be robbed. Lyra was still trying to figure him out when he stopped in front of a ship. Calling it a ship might have been generous. It was more a collection of stubbornly connected metal plates held together by duct tape, wishful thinking, and a disregard for the laws of physics. The hull was rusted, its paint long since peeled away, and a series of mismatched parts suggested that at least 6 different manufacturers had contributed unintentionally to its current state. Lyra stared at it. This is a joke. Jax grinned. Hey, don't judge. She's sensitive. He stepped forward and patted the hull. A panel immediately fell off and clattered to the ground. There was a long silence, then he cleared his throat. She does that sometimes. Lyra arched an eyebrow. Explode? No, just sheds. She rubbed her temples. What is this wreck called? The Star Drifter. Of course it is. Jax smirked. She's got character. She's got a death wish. He waved her toward the ramp. Come on. You'll love her. Lyra wasn't so sure, but she followed him anyway. The inside of the ship was only slightly better than the outside. The cockpit was cluttered with half-dismantled consoles and a chair held together by zip ties and optimism. The walls were scrawled with notes, some technical, some just random thoughts. Do not press the red button. Figure out if gravity stabilizer is haunted. Who keeps stealing my socks? And then there was the AI. A voice crackled through the speakers as they stepped inside. Welcome back, Captain Jax. You have 14 overdue payments, a warranty that expired 6 years ago, and a cargo hold full of regrets. Jax rolled his eyes. Yeah. I missed you too, Nova. The AI paused, then with genuine enthusiasm, said, Oh, you brought a guest. Is she here to kill you, or did you finally hire someone who knows what they're doing? Lyra folded her arms. I haven't decided yet. I like her, Nova said. Jax sighed. Nova, meet Lyra. Lyra blinked. Lyra? He shrugged. Felt right. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped. She'd never had a name before, not one that wasn't a number or an insult. Did she like it? She wasn't sure, but she didn't hate it. Fine, she muttered. Nova let out a suspiciously human-sounding whistle. Ooh, she's got attitude. This will be fun. Jax clapped his hands together. All right, let's get you settled. We've got, he frowned. Well, there's technically a spare room, but it's full of old ship parts and socks. Not sure why. Nova chimed in. It's because you refuse to do laundry. Shut up, Nova. Lyra pinched the bridge of her nose. I'm starting to think getting sold for 150 credits wasn't the worst thing that happened to me today. Jax grinned. See? You're adjusting already. The first night on the Star Drifter was strange. For years, Lyra had slept in cells, storage crates, the backs of transport ships. Every place had been the same, cold, unfamiliar, temporary. But here, there was warmth. There was the hum of the engines, the occasional sarcastic AI remark, and Jax snoring from the cockpit because he had forgotten to move to his own bed. Lyra lay on the cot he had set up for her, staring at the ceiling. She was free. That should have made her feel something, and yet all she felt was confusion. Jax was a mystery. The ship was a mess. The AI was a menace. And yet, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like nothing. The next morning, the Star Drifter groaned like a dying beast as it entered hyperspace, its patched-together drive rattling with a noise that sounded suspiciously like someone shaking a can of nails. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, arms crossed, watching as Jax leaned back, boots propped on the dashboard, completely at ease with the fact that his ship was one engine failure away from becoming space debris. This is the worst vessel I have ever been inside, she muttered. Jax didn't even look up. You get used to her. I don't want to get used to her. I want to survive. Nova's voice crackled to life over the speakers. Statistically speaking, your odds of survival are roughly 42%. Lyra frowned. That's not great. Nova's tone was cheerful. It's up from last week. Jax smirked. See? Progress. Lyra exhaled, resisting the urge to rub her temples. So, where exactly are we going? Cath Station, Jax said. The name stirred something in her memory. Cath was an old trade hub, mostly scavengers, mercenaries, and the kind of people who carried at least 3 knives and a grudge. Jax must have noticed her hesitation because he tilted his head. You know it? I know it's a terrible idea. Well, that's where we're headed, he said, stretching and cracking his knuckles. We need a new drive coil, and I owe someone there a drink. Lyra arched an eyebrow. You're going to risk landing on a station full of cutthroats and thieves for a drink? Jax shrugged. It's a really good drink. Nova chimed in. It's also the only place that hasn't banned him yet. Lyra shook her head. You are the worst kind of human. Jax grinned. A fun one. A reckless one. Well, he said, tapping a few buttons on the console, reckless keeps things interesting. Lyra sighed. She had been owned by many fools before, but this one might actually get her killed. As the Star Drifter approached Cath Station, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in her chest. The station loomed in the distance, a jagged metal structure surrounded by a swarm of smaller ships. It looked exactly like the kind of place that would overcharge you for fuel and then stab you for asking why. Jax, on the other hand, looked completely relaxed as he guided the ship into the docking bay. The bay was dimly lit, the metal floors slick with something Lyra didn't want to identify. A few mechanics in grease-stained jumpsuits lurked near the ships, watching with predatory interest as new arrivals stepped off their vessels. Lyra followed Jax down the ramp, her posture tense. Jax, on the other hand, looked completely at ease. I feel like I should warn you, she said, glancing around. This is the kind of place where people disappear. Jax waved a dismissive hand. I don't have enough credits to be worth kidnapping. Lyra stared at him. That is not comforting. Before she could argue further, a deep, guttural voice called out. Well, well. If it isn't Jax the Unkillable. Lyra turned her head and immediately realized why Kath had been familiar. Because standing in front of them, arms crossed, was a very large, very unpleasant-looking alien. And he recognized her. The alien was massive, easily 7 feet tall, built like a wrecking ball. His skin was a deep shade of green, his face marked with 3 jagged scars that suggested he had survived something unpleasant. His arms were crossed, thick with muscle, and he had the kind of expression that made small children cry.